Most of you will recall that back in the winter, David did a series of sermons on the Gospel of Mark. In one of those lessons, in one of those sermons, he spent just a little bit of time on a rather, I think, intriguing incident that occurred that's recorded over in Mark, the 11th chapter. I want to revisit that this morning for just a little bit and use it as a takeoff for today's sermon. It's found in Mark chapter 11, beginning in verse 12. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And the disciples heard him say it. Just to remind you of the setting, this is the Monday before he was crucified on Friday. So this is the beginning of the Passion Week. At night, they're staying at Bethany at the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And during the day, Jesus is teaching in the temple. As they're going back and forth, they cross the Mount of Olives. And as they cross the Mount of Olives, they come to the brook of Kedron. And looking up, you can see the city of Jerusalem with the wall around it, with the temple there that's just been rebuilt. Beautiful city set on that hill. So they're crossing and they're seeing that. Jerusalem and temple ahead. The Dead Sea is about 20 miles off to the southeast. They tell me that on a really clear day, from the highest point on the Mount of Olives, you can see just a sliver of the Dead Sea in the distance. So that's the setting. After leaving the fig tree, Jesus goes on to the temple. And in the temple, he chases out the money changers and those that are selling the sacrificial animals. That's what's going on. They go on back to Bethany. The next morning, in the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. "Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in their hearts, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them." What's it talking about? What's the meaning of this little incident? We've got a fig tree that's in leaf, but it's not time for them to be in full leaf. It's not time for figs. And then the next morning, it's withered. I think David's brief explanation was right on point. If you recall, what he said is, it's not about the tree. It's not about the tree. The tree is being used as a metaphor. It's being used as a metaphor, as a symbol of Israel in the Old Testament. Israel was unfaithful. Jesus has come to the Israelites. Jesus has come to the Jews. And they have rejected him and are rejecting him. The fact is, the destruction of Israel is imminent. Israel's putting on a show of being very religious, but they're unfruitful. So the destruction is coming. I want to look at that second phrase. If anyone says to this mountain, "Go throw yourself into the sea." Go throw yourself into the sea? Talking to a mountain? Just tell that mountain, go jump in a lake, and it'll do it. What's this talking about? To paraphrase David, the meaning is, it's not about the mountain. The mountain also is being used as a metaphor. It's being used as a metaphor of destruction. I mean, if you look at that city and that temple ahead as you're looking, it's magnificent. It's solid. It's on top of the mountain. It's got this big wall around it. The temple is built on grounds that are held up by huge, huge pieces of stone. It looks absolutely indestructible. And yet, it's going to be wiped out within a few years. The destruction of that mountain is already in the cards. The mountain is a metaphor. We use mountain as metaphor ourselves at times. Sometimes we'll talk about mountains as beauty and grandeur. And some of you have been to Red River just recently, and you saw some of that grandeur and some of that beauty there. Sometimes we think about it as a metaphor for a stronghold or a fortress. When I was a kid, we would find a haystack somewhere. One of us get on top of it, and everybody else try to pull them off. You know what we call that? King of the mountain. King of the mountain. That was what the game that we played. So we use it as a metaphor in that way. But there's another way that we use mountain as metaphor quite often, and that is as an obstacle, as something standing in our way. If you're hiking and you come to that cliff, that escarpment, that mountain in front of you, it's an obstacle. And I can't help but think about the pioneers as they're going across flat plains or rolling plains, and they're in level ground pretty much, making good time, and they come over a little rise, and what do they see in front of them? The Rocky Mountains. It had to just look like an absolutely impossible obstacle in front of them. The mountain as a metaphor for an obstacle. What mountain are you facing? In an audience this size, there's some of you facing mountains today. There's an obstacle out there in front of you. There's something facing you that you approach with dread. What's your mountain? Maybe it's relationships. Sociologists tell us that the breakup of a marriage or a loss of a close friend or a loved one is just devastating. It's a mountain out there. Maybe it's financial. Sociologists also tell us that the loss of a job can be just devastating to people. It's a mountain that has to be climbed. Maybe it's physical. Maybe the diagnosis is not what you hoped for, what you had prayed for. It's a mountain out there that you need to face. Maybe it's spiritual. Maybe that anchor of faith, that anchor of hope, is not what it should be. And you're facing a mountain in your life. When I think of a mountain facing someone in life, I can't help but think in my mind back to someone that I knew briefly many, many years ago. I was junior high age, and this young lady, Emily, was probably about 21, maybe 20, 22, somewhere in that range. And I only knew her for a brief period of time. She came back in the hills where I was raised on a brief visit with some distant cousins. But Emily was going blind. She'd been diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa. You may never heard of it. It's a very rare disease. It's a disease that's inherited. It's a recessive gene, so both parents have to have this particular recessive gene, and then it pops out in the child. What happens is the retina at the back of the eye, those light receptors back there called rods, just start deteriorating. They just start going bad. And at that time, there was no way to help with it. And here's what happens. Your vision, your field of vision gradually just keeps closing in so that you see less and less in front of you. I had a friend years later who had the same disease. He told me that as he came to total blindness, it was like looking through a straw. His field of vision had shrunk down so that he could still just see like through a straw. And then that closed off. And he was totally blind. Onset at age 12 or 13. Emily had perfect vision and she's 12 or 13 years old. Starts having a little problem with her eyes. They take her to the doctor. Prognosis is total blindness by age 25. By the way, she had a twin brother who had exactly the same recessive gene, the same diagnosis, and the same prognosis. How would you have handled it? How would I have handled it? I was about the same age at that point in time as she was when she learned that she was going totally blind. How would I have handled it? How would I have reacted? Let me tell you how Emily did and why she sticks out in my mind. Emily was pursuing a college degree, working hard to finish her college degree. She was learning Braille. That's that little bumps on the paper that you can read with the tips of your fingers. My fingers aren't sensitive enough to tell the difference in the floors on the elevator controls. They'll have little dots there of Braille. I don't know how they do it, but she was learning Braille and doing very well with it. She could read right along in the Bible. She was seeing all she could see. She was going to art galleries. She was going to museums. She was going to zoos to see animals. She was going to the ocean. She came to the mountains to see the mountains. And not for herself. Her goal was to be able to teach others who were born blind what things were like. Her desire was to be a teacher of the blind with that background of having been able to see. Amazing young woman. What's your mountain? I'm going to make 3 brief suggestions this morning as what to do with the mountain that you're facing. And the first thing is face your mountain with faith. And that's really 2 parts. The first thing is just face your mountain. Too often, people just try to ignore it. Don't ignore the mountain that's in front of you. Don't ignore it. Oh, maybe it'll just go away. Highly unlikely. Or maybe I'm just too busy. You know, my marriage is falling apart, but I guess I'll just spend all my time at the office. You know, the relationship within my family is just fracturing, but I'm going to go to the golf course. Don't ignore it. Don't try to obscure it. Don't try to obscure it. I don't know how many times through the years as a prosecutor I dealt with people who were actively trying to obscure whatever mountain they were facing with alcohol, with drugs, both illegal and legal drugs. In fact, I just read, just a few days ago, about a young man, I don't know what kind of mountain he was facing, but he was high on a very potent synthetic cannabinoid, that active ingredient in marijuana. Brought it out of his mind pretty much on it. He drives off the road and hits a car. Knocks that car into a second car. Drives on down the road, sits there for a minute, then crosses a median and tries to leave. And leaving behind one person burning to death in one car. And the other person, a first responder, may never be able to work as a first responder again. Whatever mountain he was facing has gotten a lot bigger. He's looking at potentially years of his life in prison because he was trying to obscure some kind of problem. Don't obscure your problem. Face it. And face it with faith. As a Christian, you are not alone. In announcements this morning, Gary was talking about family in the class in here. Family. We're a family. A support network built in. Use it. Galatians 6 and verse 2 says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. That's the law of Christ, is to be here for each other. Use it. Use it. James 5 verse 16 says, pray for one another. Well, I really won't be able to help that person. You can pray. Absolutely, you can pray for them. Pray for each other. Whatever mountain you're facing, let us pray for you. More importantly, you have God. What shall we say then to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8 and verse 31. Or Jesus, as he's leaving the apostle, says, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. David, in the 23rd Psalm, talking about the shepherd leading him to still waters and green pastures. We have a God who's ultimately in control of everything. Face your mountain with faith. Secondly, approach your mountain with courage. Approach your mountain with courage. I ran across this definition, statement. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear. A guy by the name of A.H. Redmond. Think about that for a moment. I don't know if you've ever taken the time to look at a Congressional Medal of Honor write-up, whether someone has been awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest honor that the United States gives. Almost invariably, as you read through those things, you find that that person acted to help others. He acted despite being scared to death. He acted despite being filled with fear himself, but he judged that the life of his comrades was more important even than his own. That's courage. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because a couple of weeks ago, Brady Goin did a Wednesday night class in here on the same thing and did a good job with it. Go back and look at it on YouTube if you want to hear the rest of it. But one of the things he came up with that I just loved, from John Wayne of all people, courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. Approach your mountain with courage. 1 Corinthians 16, verses 13 and 14 says, be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous. Be strong. Do everything in love. Those people who know a whole lot more about Greek than I do say that these are imperative mood instructions. What in the world is an imperative mood in Greek? Well, it's this. Take out the trash. It's not merely a suggestion. It's not a hint. Or possibly when you get around to it, it's take out the trash. Do it. It's a command. And in that verse, Paul says, be courageous. Face that mountain with courage. Approach that mountain with courage. Be courageous. Some version of that phrase, be courageous, do not fear, be not afraid, some version of that appears more than any other single command in all of the Bible. Depending on how broadly you define it, anywhere from 150, 170 to more than 300 times, there's an instruction, be not afraid, be courageous. Thirdly, endure your mountain with patience. Endure your mountain with patience. Your mountain may be serving God's purposes. You ever thought of that? Your mountain may be serving God's purposes. James 1 and verse 4 says, trials and tribulations can add to your spiritual maturity. Maybe God's allowing that so that you will mature spiritually. Or maybe even more specific. Do you remember Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh over in 2 Corinthians chapter 12? He had this something wrong. Speculation is, may have been going blind. May have been his eyesight. For someone who traveled as much as he did, for someone who read and studied and wrote as much as he did, blindness in a period of time when there was no lenses would have been very difficult. He says, I prayed to God to take that away. 3 times I did it. Do you know what he gave as God's reason for that mountain that he was facing? To keep me from becoming conceited. Your mountain may be serving God's purposes. Second thought, there's no guarantee of a quick resolution. I'm not up here saying, here's a 3-point method by which you can get rid of your mountain like that. That you can say, mountain, go jump in the lake. And it does. I'm not saying that. There's no guarantee because God doesn't operate on our timetable. Go back and read through some of the Old Testament. So many stories of delays and delays, sometimes for hundreds of years, as with slavery in Egypt. Over in the New Testament and Revelation, the persecution of the Christians in Asia Minor is horrible, and they're crying out, Revelation 6 and verse 10, how long, God, are you going to let this happen? God doesn't operate on our timetable. Our mountain may take much longer than we wish. And the third thought on that is there no guarantee of our desired result. There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that what we want concerning that mountain is going to happen. The easiest example of that is Jesus in Gethsemane. Jesus in Gethsemane says, hey, if it's your will, let's do it some other way. If we can get this done some other method, let's do it. Not as I will, but as you will. And Jesus went to the cross. Remember Emily? Working on her degree, learning Braille, going to see everything she could see, not for herself, but so that she could teach. I mentioned she had a twin brother. Perfect vision until he was 12, 13, 14 years old. Same diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa. Same prognosis. Young man, you're going blind. How did Emily's twin brother handle it? He took his own life at age 17. There's a right way and a wrong way to approach your mountain. Whatever mountain you're facing. Whatever mountain you're facing. I don't know what it is, but whatever mountain you might be facing or might face in the future. For some of it, it's just getting older. Seems like a mountain some days. Face it with faith. Approach it with courage. Endure it with patience. I don't know your situation today. Maybe you've got a mountain that's staring you in the face that you need the concerted prayers of this family to help bear your burden. If that's your situation, we're ready to do it this morning. Or maybe you're not a Christian. And the opportunity this morning is for you to believe, to be willing to confess Jesus as the Son of God, as your Savior, to repent and be united with Him in baptism. Whatever you need this morning, won't you come as we stand and sing?